The wind had a voice in that town, a low whistle through broken window panes and the slack hinges of doors that no longer had a purpose. Caleb Boone had grown used to it the way a man grows used to his own scars. At first it burned, then it simply became part of the body. His boots stirred dust as he crossed the street where once children had run and merchants had shouted their bargains. Now only the echo of his steps and the occasional sigh of a raven disturbed the silence. He had lived here alone for years, the ghost town becoming less of a place and more of a mirror to his own exile. He was 30 now, but in the shadows cast by boarded buildings, he sometimes felt older than the land itself. Every day carried the same rhythm. Fix the corral. Check the well. Ride out into the ridges to gather firewood. Speak to no one but the horses that lingered like loyal ghosts. And at night, when the desert cooled and the stars burned with a fierce clarity, he would sit on the porch with a tin cup and ask himself why he had stayed. The answers never came, only the ache of memory. He had once been a man among men, a rancher of standing, until pride and violence had driven him into this hollow of dust. Folks whispered his name like a cautionary tale, Caleb Boone, the rancher who lost it all. It was on one such day, when the sun was tilting westward and the heat shimmered on the horizon, that movement caught his eye. A figure, small against the spread of desert, walked steadily toward the town. At first he thought it a mirage, the kind that came to a lonely man who had stared too long at nothing. But as the shape grew nearer, his heart stirred in a way it had not for years. He leaned on the post, shading his eyes, and waited. The desert was not known for sending gifts. She came into focus slowly, like a painting emerging from fog. A young woman, her hair long and black as raven wings, her clothes worn from travel, her steps heavy but unbroken. She carried herself with a dignity that no exhaustion could erase. Caleb felt his breath hitch. He had not seen another soul up close for so long that the mere sight of her seemed almost holy. And yet, caution rose in him like a reflex. Who was she and why here of all places? When she reached the well, she lowered the bucket with practiced hands, drank deeply and then looked up at him. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his without flinching. He realized then that it was not only thirst that had driven her into this dead town. She was seeking shelter, though from what, he could not yet know. He stepped forward, awkward in his own skin. "You can rest," he said, his voice rasping from disuse. "There's shade and food enough." For a moment she said nothing, only studied him with the quiet watchfulness of someone used to measuring men by what they left unsaid. Then with a small nod she accepted. She did not thank him, not with words, but the way she lowered herself onto the porch and let out a breath told him all he needed to know. He brought water, bread, and a strip of dried venison. She ate sparingly as if each bite were weighed against pride. As the fire cracked that night, the silence between them grew heavy. Caleb was a man who once could talk a river into flooding, but now every word felt like a trespass. She was the first to break it, her voice low and steady. "My name is Ayanna." He let her name settle, soft in the desert air. Caleb Boone. Another silence followed, though gentler now. The air shifted with their breathing, the space between them charged by presence alone. He found himself noticing small things, the way her hands were rough but graceful, the way her gaze held more history than her years suggested. And curiosity crept in. What road had she walked to land at his forsaken door? In the days that followed she remained. She mended her moccasins by the fire, tended the herbs she found sprouting wild near the riverbed, and shared meals with him in quiet intervals. He discovered she had left her people after whispers and judgment followed her, an unkindness she would not name in detail. In her eyes lingered both loss and defiance. Caleb, who carried his own shame like a brand across his back, recognized the weight. They were both exiles, bound by different roads but meeting at the same dead town. The town began to breathe again in small ways. She swept the dust from a doorway. He patched a roof. Together, they made small fires of grace in a place the world had abandoned. Caleb found himself watching her laugh one morning when a horse nudged her for grain. The sound was not loud, but in the hollow of that town it filled every corner. He realized then how much silence had starved him. But not all who passed through were kind. Riders, strangers with whiskey on their breath, would glance at Caleb with sly grins, whispering about the rancher who kept an Apache woman. Shame and judgment rose like smoke on the wind, trying to choke the fragile life they were building. Caleb stood by the window after such encounters, fists clenched, torn between anger and fear. He wanted to be proud, to stand tall, but old wounds told him he was unworthy of defending anyone. Still, when he looked at Ayanna, who carried herself with unyielding grace, something inside him began to shift. The trial came sooner than he expected. One night, under a moon pale as bone, a group of drifters rode in. Their laughter was sharp, their eyes mean. They called to Ayanna with insults, mocking her heritage, mocking Caleb for keeping her. The quiet town suddenly felt like a tinderbox. Caleb's hands shook as he gripped his rifle. His heart screamed to protect her, but fear whispered he was still the same broken man who had lost everything. Then Ayanna stepped forward, standing in the open with her chin high, her eyes blazing. She did not speak, but her silence was a shield stronger than iron. Caleb looked at her and something broke inside him, not in defeat but in release. For the first time in years he chose to stand. He stepped beside her, rifle lowered but steady, his voice hard as stone. "Leave." The drifters laughed at first, but something in his eyes made them hesitate. Caleb was no longer the man haunted by failure. He was a man who had chosen his place, chosen his companion. In that choice lay a power the intruders could not touch. They muttered, spat into the dirt and finally rode off, their jeers fading into the night. After they were gone, Caleb found his hands trembling. He set the rifle down, ashamed of the weakness that still lingered. But then Ayanna took his hands in hers, steadying them, steadying him. Their eyes met, and in that silence was an unspoken vow. Neither spoke of love, for love was too fragile a word to carry what they felt. Instead, Caleb whispered almost to himself, "Stay, stay with me." She did not answer with words. Her hand remained in his, warm and sure. That was enough. The seasons turned. The ghost town shifted slowly, like a wound knitting into scar. Gardens sprouted. Roofs held against rain. The saloon that once echoed with drunken songs now carried the faint hum of Ayanna's voice when she worked. They married not with fanfare but beneath the stars, vows spoken in glances, sealed in the quiet strength of their days. And Caleb, who once believed himself a ruin, found himself whole again in the presence of the woman who had walked out of the desert. He would sit sometimes at dusk, watching the gold dust rise, and think of how easily he might have remained alone until death. Instead, he had been given a chance at dignity, at belonging. To the one who listens now, perhaps years later, let this memory be a lantern. Even in a place abandoned by the world, where shame and silence seem the only companions, two souls can find each other and choose to belong. And that choice is the strongest shelter a heart can build.